Israel is once again at war for survival after 50 years, but then again, Israel has never really been out of conflict. Since its inception as a nation in 1948, its Arab neighbors had plotted and attacked it in several high-profile conflicts, such as in 1948, the Six-Day War in 1967, and the Yom Kippur War in 1973. It has been under constant terrorist attacks longer than most of us have been alive. And to be honest, Israel has not always made the best decisions, but then again, it is living in a state of survival. Who and what created the area known as Palestine? Why have the Arabs in the region been so hostile to Israel? Why has there been no solution after all these decades?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
One of the great hypocrisies of the Muslim and Arab world is their public concern for the Palestinians. The other Arab nations provide no financial support, and they have not offered them sanctuary within their borders. Currently, they will not even let them become refugees in their countries. The Jordanians do not want them, the Syrians, and neither does Lebanon. Egypt doesn't want them, Saudi Arabia doesn't want them. None of the Persian Gulf states will accept them. If they solved the Palestinian problem along with Israel, the Islamic terrorists would not have a platform to complain about. However, it is Israel who gives them access to water, electricity, and food, as they have no domestic produce or manufacturing capability except when it comes to making bombs and short-range rockets with materials and money supplied by Iran. The UN has never condemned the PLO for their education methods, really indoctrination, where children are taught to hate and kill Jews at the expense of learning to read and write. The greater ignorance of the situation are those people who believe that Palestine is being subjugated by Israel. First, there is not now, nor has there ever been a Palestinian nation, nor a people known as Palestinians. But previously, in biblical times, there were a people known as Philistines. However, Israel was an established kingdom 3,500 years ago, and Jews had been living there for over 5,700 years. The term Palestine was coined by Emperor Hadrian in 132 to 135 AD when he responded to the last great Jewish uprising against Roman occupation called the Bar Kokhba Revolt. He renamed Jerusalem Elia and named the territory of Judea Syria Palestina, and slaughtered Jews, scattering many of them to the winds forever, some going to Europe, others to Africa and India. However, some still remained. Many other conquerors later occupied the area after the Romans, such as the Byzantine Greeks, various Muslim caliphates, including the Ottomans, and then the British after World War I. It was under the Arabs in the 6th century that Jews lost their lands and became a subjugated minority. However, for centuries, the Ottoman Turks also subjugated the Arabs, who were also Muslims. But there was a resurgence of Jews returning to their ancestral homeland in the 1800s. The Muslims living there for centuries had not cultivated the land and left it barren, and the ruling Ottomans allowed it and taxed the Jews. The Jews who came back joined those still there and built farms, tilled and fertilized the land, and turned a barren wasteland into a viable and productive community. They created industries, and a prosperous community at that, which drew Arabs from neighboring regions into the area, who began to identify as Palestinians. The Arabs who flooded into the area for over a century through the Ottoman Empire until after World War II then claimed historic ownership of the region illegitimately. Israel would not become a nation again until 1948, but when it was established, Israel opened up to those Arabs living in what was declared as Palestine, which is simply a geographic region and not a nation, and many Arabs are in fact Israeli citizens. They lived and worked alongside Jews, Israelis, and have no ideological hatred or anti-Jewish indoctrination. Some even served in the Israeli military as they are citizens. The modern crisis was created by both the Balfour Declaration, offering Jews a homeland for their service in World War I, followed by the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, which created the modern Middle East, drafted by Sir Mark Sykes of England and François-Georges Picot of France in 1916, which carved up the Middle East into colonies and mandates for France and Great Britain. In addition, there was an agreement between Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner in Egypt, and Hussein bin Ali, who was the Sharif of Mecca. During 1916-17, Britain clearly agreed to recognize Arab independence if the Arabs helped to defeat the Ottomans. The Arabs were satisfied until they became aware of the Balfour Declaration. The 1917 Balfour Declaration promised British support for a Jewish national home in Palestine, which was not what the Arabs expected or even wanted. Part of the declaration states, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object." These conflicting promises remained at the heart of the impasse between two distinct nationalist groups in Mandate Palestine: the Zionists, supporting a Jewish state, and the Arabs, later to be renamed Israelis and Palestinians. The Jews did not get their homeland, and the Arabs did not get their independent nations, with exception to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. These new territories were created out of the remnants of the old Ottoman Empire, excluding the Arabian Peninsula when the war was over. Italy and Imperial Russia also agreed, with the United States giving a quiet nod. The agreement created new colonial spheres of influence that created new borders across the region that had previously been divided along ethnic, linguistic, and religious lines. The borders were technically artificial and not really recognized by the nomadic tribes. It was made official by the former Allied powers with the signing of the San Remo Conference in 1920. Arabs, Jews, and Christians lived in what would become Transjordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria under British and French protection and governance. The Saudis established their own kingdom. The region was divided into Area A and would be under French control, covering modern-day Syria and Lebanon, while Area B would be under British control, which included modern-day Jordan and Iraq, with an international administration managing the area designated as Palestine, effectively a neutral region. However, in 1920, Palestine was effectively transferred to sole British control as Mandatory Palestine and governed by their civil administration until 1948, when Arabs attacked Jews in response to the proposed United Nations Declaration of the creation of the Jewish State of Israel. When that occurred, Israel was attacked by all of their Arab neighbors, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, with Arab fighters staged in southern Lebanon in what they called the War of Survival, and Israel won. But tensions only increased, and there were random attacks for many decades afterward. The Palestinian Liberation Organization was formed in 1964 in Cairo, Egypt, claiming to represent the world's Palestinians, meaning any Arabs who lived in the post-World War I mandated Palestine before Israel was created in 1948. When Israel was created, 750,000 Palestinians became displaced, moving into Jordan, Syria, Egypt, or the surrounding areas, including Lebanon. The argument was that Jews stole their land to create Israel, when in reality the Arabs were, in most cases, squatters on land that had been Turkish-controlled territory and then later British-controlled territory. Few people had legitimate deeds to the land they lived on. Few purchased any land, and those who had actual property rights weren't in fact allowed to remain, but most chose to leave, even though Israel invited them to stay. But Israel invited these Palestinians to return and become part of the greater society. The 1967 Six-Day War once again brought Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Arab elements from Lebanon into the fight against Israel. Israel won and secured Sinai, the West Bank, and Gaza. Then in 1973, Israel was involved in the Yom Kippur War against its old enemies, and once again Israel prevailed. The Palestinian Liberation Organization rose to prominence under Yasser Arafat, who became chairman of the PLO's executive committee, holding the title until his death in 2004 and supported by the Arab League. The PLO launched attacks on Israel from its bases in Jordan starting in the late 1960s, but pressure from the UN upon King Hussein forced the PLO to relocate to Lebanon in 1971. However, once again, due to extreme pressure from the Christian government, the PLO leadership moved its bases to Tunisia in 1982, where it remained until relocating to Gaza in 1994. It was during this time that Arafat and others conspired to rewrite the history of the region. A false narrative erupted that took root and is still believed today. They claimed that Palestinians had always been there and were then forced out by the Jews. Until 1881, when the first large contingents of Jews arrived back to the ancestral homelands, no one was living there, as the land could not support life. As previously stated, there was no Arab state until after France and Great Britain granted independence to their colonial holdings. But when they did, the Jews were already there. The tensions would grow and continue to grow, and what resulted was the birth of Islamic terrorism, which still exists today. Islamic terrorists would strike in West Germany during the 1972 Munich Olympics. When Black September, an extremist faction of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, broke into the Israeli athletes' compound, it resulted in the deaths of all 11 Israelis in that building. Israel launched the most widespread terrorist hunt in history, Operation Wrath of God, the covert assassination campaign ordered by Prime Minister Golda Meir. Israeli assassins spanned the globe, hunting down and killing those responsible, and Arafat and the other Arab leaders were outraged. For reference, there are two good films by the same name, The Sword of Gideon, which are highly recommended watching. The other is Munich, starring Eric Bana. In one of the best diplomatic moves in history, President James Earl Carter managed to bring Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin together, and in 1978 they signed the Camp David Peace Accords, ending Egypt's aggression toward Israel. The Shiite Islamic terrorist group Hezbollah, or Army of God, was created with Iranian support and funding in Lebanon following the Israeli invasion of that country in 1982 to try and end the 15-year-long civil war, and they waged a 34-day war with Israel in 2006 and afterwards dominated Lebanese politics. Arafat was not satisfied with all the offers the Israelis made, such as territorial integration and jobs for Arabs. Arafat wanted even more, including Jerusalem as the capital of a new and independent Palestine. In 1987, he launched the first Intifada uprising against Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and only ended in 1991. As a result of horrendous terror attacks against Israel and the massive retaliation by the Jewish state, a negotiation was proposed, resulting in the Oslo Accords. Arafat signed a series of treaties with Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and the two leaders were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994. However, radical idiocy is not exclusive to the Muslim terrorists. On November 4, 1995, at 21:30 local time, at the end of a rally in support of the Oslo Accords at the Kings of Israel Square in Tel Aviv, Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli ultra-nationalist named Yigal Amir. He was radically opposed to Rabin's peace initiative that gave territory to the Palestinians, for which he was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize shared with Arafat, particularly the signing of the Oslo Accords. Even with these offers, Arafat still wanted more, knowing he could never get it. He needed the problem to exist to justify his existence. The Oslo Accords established the Palestinian National Authority, laying the groundwork for the PLO to have representation in the United Nations. They were authorized to govern parts of Gaza and the West Bank, and created a timetable for Israel to gradually withdraw from those regions. However, peace between the Israelis and Palestinians was short-lived. The Second Intifada occurred from 2000 to 2005, which saw massive Israeli responses. They bulldozed and razed the homes of known terrorist members, making entire families homeless as collective punishment. Much to the future detriment of the Arabs, or Palestinians if you will, the Sunni Islamic militant group called Hamas won the majority in the Palestinian Legislative Council elections of 2006. The result was a major conflict between the ruling Fatah party and Hamas, which led to violence in 2007, and Hamas, supported by Iran, defeated Fatah in several small battles. The result was that Fatah controlled the West Bank and Hamas took over Gaza, and in 2014 Hamas and Fatah agreed to a deal that would form a unified national Palestinian government. Hamas has been labeled an international terrorist organization since 1997. Hezbollah has always been on the list. In 2011, the Palestinian Authority applied for full member state status in the UN, which was not approved through the UN General Assembly, voted to make Palestine a non-member observer state in 2012, with no real power or voting rights as they were not, and still are not today, a nation-state. Yet this classification allows the Palestinians to participate in General Assembly debates with the possibility of eventually joining UN agencies, although that does not seem likely given that they are governed by a terrorist organization. In a travesty of logic, and supported in the votes by other nations with questionable human rights records, the PLO did become a member of the International Criminal Court in 2015. This is akin to having Heinrich Himmler and the Gestapo conduct the Nuremberg trials. Mahmoud Abbas serves as the PLO's chairman and president of the Palestinian Authority and is considered relatively moderate and has voiced opposition to violence in past conflicts. Abbas and his party have petitioned the UN for a two-state solution, meaning Palestine would become an independent nation alongside Israel, but it is a controversial plan that Israel and the United States have always opposed for obvious reasons. The demands by the PLO and concessions they expect from Israel will never materialize, and they know it. This is only a ruse to justify continued attacks and hopefully maintain or increase regional Muslim aggression against Israel. The current problems today are a reaction to President Donald Trump initiating the Abraham Accords, bringing Arab nations into coalition with Israel. While Hamas threatens Israel in the West and has recently launched what can only be defined as a suicidal terrorist attack, they are also a threat in the East and the West Bank. However, King Abdullah of Jordan may be able to keep them in check. The greater threat was always Hezbollah, who had the greatest funding and support, as well as sanctuary in southern Lebanon. But Hamas received $350 million from Iran, and our government under Biden gave billions to Iran and has not enforced the oil sanctions imposed by the UN and enforced by President Trump, allowing Iran to make several $billion a day. Islamic Jihad, while an independent group operating in Gaza and also funded by Iran, is also involved working with Hamas. However, if Iran becomes more directly involved, that will broaden the scope of Israeli military operations, which I will cover in a hypothetical review in the near future. Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, they do not care about the Palestinian people living in harmony with Israel, as do Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. They only have one psychopathic mission fueled by a misguided, twisted religious fervor, and that is to eradicate, eliminate, and erase the Jewish nation and its people. The stateless Islamic terrorists who attacked Israel, a sovereign nation, are not protected under the Geneva or Hague Conventions. In essence, they are walking dead men, who force their populations to suffer the brunt of Israeli retaliation as human shields. Israel has always taken great pains to avoid collateral damage despite what the worldwide liberal and Marxist media says, and they warned Hamas to evacuate the civilians, but Hamas has been blocking the refugees trying to flee to Egypt, and Egypt even refused to open the gate to let them in. So while Israel does its best to have civilians moved out of the future combat zone, Hamas has refused to comply and uses their civilians as human shields. They and Hezbollah mount their deployable weapon systems at hospitals, daycare centers, schools, and other locations that are densely populated by non-combatants. They want the collateral damage because it's good press when they can get it. America and Western Europe should be on the alert, as we have all stupidly allowed millions of single military-age males entry into our respective nations. Under the current Biden administration, we have over 8 million illegal aliens in the country, of which over 200 have been captured on the terrorist watch list, meaning they're terrorists. And many of these captured men are coming from the areas of concern. Some are known, many are unknown, and thousands from countries on the terrorist watch list are currently residing in your backyard. But Israel will deal with the problem. I have faith in that. If I had to lay a wager, I would put my money on Israel.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Send us comments and show ideas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.